Hi everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe. So yesterday this happened. Jimmy Carter, 39th President of the United States, dead at 100. And this is something that I've been watching for a couple years now. And I'm about to explain why. There's a lot of you that are new. I haven't really covered this for a long time. But this is actually what I think might be the end of a series of prominent people, typically prime ministers, presidents, royalty, that are the longest living or the longest serving or the last, that have all died within the last couple of years very close together at a time when President Nelson is outliving all of them. And there are really interesting details. This is one of the more mind-blowing things for me that I've covered on the channel. And we've been watching Jimmy Carter because like I said, my theory is that he may be the last of this series. Okay, so I heard about this from my friend Jen Stevens with Christian Fire Poppy. So if you like my content, you're likely going to like hers. We talk about a lot of the same topics. It's a Second Coming channel, so make sure to subscribe to her. She's almost at 10,000, so it'd be great if you guys could help her along and get her across the 10,000 mark. Believe me, you'll like her. If you haven't seen her before, I'm pretty sure you'll like her and her content. And then after I found this out yesterday, in the evening, Jenica and I went on a drive, and here where we are in South Central Kansas, there was a pretty incredible sunset, and I took pictures, and this picture right here is an accurate depiction of what it looked like toward the end of the sunset. The earlier pictures, and doesn't that look kind of ominous and apocalyptic? I'm not saying that it means anything, but it's interesting that it played out like that. Earlier, it looked more like this. These pictures did not capture how vibrant and what it actually looked like, and that's always disappointing. But this one over here, the one that's like all dark, this is what it looked like when I took this picture. Okay, so my gosh, I can't believe this. And this is happening just a few days before New Year's, before we enter into the year 2025, which I think that is significant. I'm going to go over it all. Okay, so Jimmy Carter, the 39th president of the United States and a former peanut farmer whose vision of a quote-unquote competent and compassionate government propelled him into the White House, died at his home in Plains, Georgia on Sunday. The Carter Center confirmed he was 100. That's the same age that President Nelson is. More on that in just a minute. There are some similarities or just things to think about with him and President Nelson. Okay, he has cited the Panama Canal treaties and the Camp David Accords that brought peace between Egypt and Israel as among his greatest personal accomplishments. Now that might be something to think about. His legacy, part of it being the Camp David Accords, peace between Egypt and Israel, as Israel is in this unusual war that still hasn't ended. It's still going. We don't know how it's going to end. But we know that at some point, Israel's going to have its final war before the Second Coming, including the battles of Armageddon and the siege on Jerusalem. Could something happen in Egypt? I don't foresee it, but I mean, anything could happen. I don't know. The man who brought this to pass, he just died. Okay, we focused on peace. Sorry, I don't know why that's highlighted. We focused on peace, he told Washington Post in 2014. We never shot a bullet or dropped a bomb on anyone, end quote. But peace wasn't always easily maintained, and a perceived lack of strength in dealing with bad actors likely contributed to his lopsided 1980 defeat by Ronald Reagan. The final 14 months of his presidency were dominated by the Iran hostage crisis following the country's revolution. Now, that is something that is definitely at play right now in this war with Israel. So very interesting. Jimmy Carter, Egypt, Iran, Israel, then and now. Interesting stuff. Um, yeah, and I'll end it there for this. So I'll put a link for this in the description box below. Okay, so let's look at this spreadsheet that I've put together. Haven't looked at this in a while. This is my spreadsheet called Timeline Deaths. And this is how it went, in case you're new to the channel. So back in 2022, I was looking forward to President Nelson's birthday because with that birthday, if you're not going by days and months, if you're just going by birthday, his birthday that year was going to make him the longest living prophet or apostle of our dispensation. So I felt like that was important, that it was notable. It was definitely unprecedented. So I was anticipating that. And what happened was the day before his birthday, Queen Elizabeth II, who was the longest reigning British monarch, passed away. And it shocked me because she has been around my entire life. It felt like she was just going to live forever. So I felt like there was something to that. I was like, well, it's kind of like, the prophet, he represents our church and he's still going strong. She died at 96. In that year, he reached the age of 98. And so I was like, well, maybe there's kind of like a little sign in this. It's like, when we think about the millennium and the second coming and how the nations of the world, as we know them right now, the the kingdoms, nations of the world, they're going to come to an end. And excuse me, it's only going to be Christ and his government, his political government during the 1,000 years. So could this be like a little sign of like, well, this old order is going the way of the earth, and soon it's going to be Christ and his kingdom? Well, it turns out that Queen Elizabeth wasn't the only one. A couple months before that, really just a couple weeks, Mikhail Gorbachev, the longest living leader of the Soviet Union, died at 91. So you have these different people representing their nations. The Soviet Union, which is no longer around, the United Kingdom. These are two really important nations in world history. I hope I don't need to tell you that. And then a few months before that, Shinzo Abe, who was Japan's longest serving prime minister, was assassinated. So Japan, Soviet Union, United Kingdom, and then with President Nelson reaching that birthday, representing the church, okay? And then after that, China, Jiang Zemin, longest living president of China and leader of the Chinese Communist Party, died. And then you had like lesser figures, but interesting nonetheless. Abigail Kawananakoa, who it was known as the last Hawaiian princess. She was a part of I don't know if there kind of still is, but the Hawaiian royal family. And then after that, even though this is not a country, and I don't think it really matters if it is a country or not, people have different priorities in their life. For some people, they would place country above other things. For some people, they would place sports above other things in their life. So for some people, this is their idolatry, is sports heroes and entertainment and stuff like that. But you had Pele, who was known as the king of soccer. He passed away on December 29th of 2022. And then very interestingly, and this is kind of similar to what just happened with Jimmy Carter, but in 2022, on New Year's Eve, of all days, Pope Emeritus Francis the 16th passed away, and he was the longest living pope of all time at the age of 95. The Catholic Church has kind of played its hand in world history, hasn't it? So very powerful nations and organizations, Japan, Soviet Union, United Kingdom, the church, China, soccer. I think it's the most popular sport in the world. And then the Catholic Church. But it doesn't end there. Just like a couple weeks later, the last king of Greece, Constantine II, passed away. Now, he was in exile. It doesn't matter, though, because that royal family basically came to an end. He spent most of his life in exile, but he was the last king of Greece. And then you have music icons. Lisa Marie Presley, the princess of rock, because her father Elvis was the king of rock. And then on the 17th of January, Lucille Randon, who was the longest living nun of the Catholic Church of all time, passed away at 118 years old and 340 days. What are the chances of that? Of the longest living pope, and then a couple weeks later, the longest living nun, they both pass away. It's bizarre. And then with all these other ones. Now, before I continue, I want you to think about this. People will be like, oh, you're just reading into it. It's just, no, I'm not. Because I can't say that it's a sign. I think it's kind of silly if you don't think that this is a sign, but I can't say that with certainty. But what I can say with certainty is to replicate this is next to impossible. In other words, there's not going to be any time in the near future or even distant future that this same thing is going to happen. I doubt we're going to have a Soviet Union again. If we did, then we would have to wait for somebody in the future of the Soviet Union to outlive Mikhail Gorbachev. So that would be like one piece in replicating this. We would have to have a pope that outlived Pope Benedict. We would have to, all these people would have to be passed up. And then once that happened, they would all have to die within a short period of time, just like what we're seeing here. So I can say with certainty, a certain degree of certainty, I don't think we're going to see this kind of display again. And that's what makes me think that something special is going on, especially when it seems to be related with President Nelson and his age. There's been a lot of attention given to President Nelson's age. Okay, so let's continue. Tina Turner. Sorry. It's just, okay, talking about all these like serious people. Okay, Tina Turner, the queen of rock and roll. So now the entire rock and roll royal family is dead. I'm not laughing at her death. It's just kind of, okay. And then we had some notable American deaths. Now, these were not presidents of the United States, but they represented the different branches of government. The first one was Dianne Feinstein at 90 years old, the longest serving woman in U.S. Senate history. I thought that was notable, and so did some of you. You sent me emails with the article, so I added it. So she would represent the legislative branch of government in the United States in this series. And then Henry Kissinger, who, according to the New York Times, was the most powerful Secretary of State in the post-World War II era. So the executive branch, I thought that was kind of interesting. He's not the longest serving or anything like that, but it felt notable enough to where I added it. And some of you felt the same way. And then you had Sandra Day O'Connor, first woman to serve as a Supreme Court justice. That seemed notable. So you have legislative, executive, and the judicial branch. And then for the entirety of the European Union, the architect of the modern European Union, Jacques Delors, the longest serving European Commission president, passed away. These are big, powerful countries, organizations, blocks. Now we're in 2024. And of all days, January 14th, which is President Nelson's anniversary date of when he became president of the church. So this year, it would have been his 6th anniversary. On that very day, Queen Margaret II, who was the longest sitting monarch in Denmark's history, she didn't pass away, but she abdicated the throne. So that was interesting. I thought I would note that. And then Italy. Vittorio Emanuele of Savoy, son of Italy's last king, and he himself had previously declared himself king of Italy. He passed away. And I did a whole video about that. I've done like a video about all these people, but in this case, there is kind of a case to be made that when we're talking about the Roman Empire, I'm not talking about the Byzantine, the Eastern Empire, but just the Western. And if you're like focusing on Rome itself, the city of Rome, and you're focusing on Italy, if you take the history of the Roman Empire from beginning to end, and then its descendants, including modern day Italy, he kind of is almost like the last Roman, not emperor, but do you get what I'm saying? Like the last person that would be in that spot. Emperor, king, the top dog in Italy. From Roman Empire until modern day. He's like the last one. There's not going to be another person declaring themselves king of Italy or emperor of Italy or anything like that. So that was interesting. And now, yesterday, so we were thinking up until this point, well, we knew about Jimmy Carter, and we realized that look at this. He was born, let me zoom in. He was born October 1st, 1924. President Nelson was born just the month before, September 9th of 1924. So less than a month apart. How is it that the longest living U.S. president was born less than a month than the longest living president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? How does that happen? But it did, and it has. And we were thinking, a lot of you, along with me, were thinking that, you have all these countries represented, and it would be fitting if this is some kind of countdown or if it's some kind of grand sign of some type, it would be fitting that the United States would be the last one. There are a couple other options potentially. So you have Benjamin Netanyahu, for example. This is BBC News, and I just picked this because it was the first thing that came up, but I already knew this. So Benjamin Netanyahu is Israel's longest serving prime minister. So Israel could be the last one. I don't think he's anywhere close to dying of old age at this point, but if something happened, then maybe he's going to be the last one. I don't know. So that's someone to keep our eyes on. I thought there was like somebody else. No, probably just him. I can't think of anybody else that would be more significant, or any other country that would be more significant than the United States. Potentially Israel. Now this is just happening a few days before New Year's. We're about to enter the year 2025. And in case you missed this video, I discovered something really interesting to me anyway, just within this last week or two. I have this spreadsheet. It's currently called Judaism Jubilees. I'm probably going to change it to Timeline Jubilees because I've done more work on this, and I discovered that Joseph Smith had declared some Jubilees, which I didn't know before. And what he was calling Jubilees, it doesn't seem it was the type of Jubilee that we read in the Old Testament where you go 49 years and then the 50th year is the Jubilee. But rather, it's like he was... Now, remember, we're in a new dispensation and we don't live the law of Moses anymore. But there are elements that still survive and things that we still kind of like still do, but in a different way. So what he was calling Jubilees more closely lines up to the idea of sabbatical years, where in Judaism and the Old Testament, you would view a year kind of like a day of the week. So in this case, 1830, based on what I'm about to show you, would be like the Monday of years. 1831 would be Tuesday. And then 1836 the seventh year. So 1830 is the first. Okay, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh. I have to do that because sometimes it's hard for people to follow along. 1836 was the seventh year. So it would have been the Sabbath of years. If it was Judaism, they'd call it the Saturday. That's their Shabbat. But I'm just doing Sunday because it's us. So at the time of the dedication of the Kirtland Temple, I'm not going to read this, but you can pause and read this if you want. Joseph Smith declared a Jubilee. And then 7 years later, following that pattern, in 1843, he declared, here, let me scroll down. He declared another Jubilee on April 6th of that year. You can pause and read this. Both Joseph Smith and at the time Elder Wilford Woodruff both wrote about it. In both cases, the Jubilee coincided with April 6th. So just one more reason why April 6th is significant. And these Jubilees were probably called on April 6th because that's the Savior's birthday. I don't have any record that I've found after this point that the church continued to do these like 7-year sabbatical years or Joseph Smith Jubilees. I don't know what to call it. But if it had continued, and maybe it has, maybe the brethren have kind of kept track of this. Maybe it's not meant for the rest of the church, really. But if it had continued, this is where we would find ourselves today. Let's go to 2024 and 2025. Well, no, sorry. Let's start with 2017. 2017, we had that great American eclipse that went over Jackson County and far west and Adamant-Yaman. And it could not have varied by just even a couple miles. Otherwise, the path of totality would not have covered up those 3 sites. So you had that in 2017. And then next year was the Joseph Smith Jubilee or Shemitah or sabbatical year. Shemitah is the Hebrew name for it. And that's when President Nelson became president of the church. On January 14th. 14 is 2 sevens. Joseph Smith had the first vision at the age of 14. 7s are important. Well, 6 years later, this year, 2024, we had the 2024 total solar eclipse where the path of totality went over the Kirtland Temple that had just recently been purchased, as well as the Sacred Grove, as well as Fayette, New York, where the church was established. And then next year, 2025, would be the 28th sabbatical year, or Shemitah or Jubilee, that Joseph Smith seems to have started back during his lifetime. And it's also going to be President Nelson's 7-year anniversary on January 14th. So President Nelson is currently in his 7th year, and it will be completed on January 14th, 2025. To visualize this, again, it's okay, but some people struggle with this. 2018 was his first year. He became president of the church January 14th, 2018. First year, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, which ends January 14th of 2025. That's his 7-year anniversary. So 7, it symbolizes perfection, completion, wholeness. Is the primary part of President Nelson's presidency, is it within these 7 years, everything that he's done within these 7 years? We don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. So that's interesting. And then one last thing I want to show you, speaking of eclipses, we haven't looked at this spreadsheet for a while. This is my spreadsheet called Signs Eclipses 1. What I did is I took all these significant locations. You have the 7 headquarters of the church, as well as other significant places. St. George, the site of the St. George Temple, which is the longest operating temple in church history, continually operating temple. Rome, Jerusalem, and I'm probably going to add more on here, but you'll notice that in 2024, In 1924, you have President Nelson, who was born, and President Jimmy Carter, less than a month apart. And then a few months after that, there was a total solar eclipse that went over the Sacred Grove, Fayette, and New York City. But I'm mostly focusing on the Sacred Grove in this case. So 1925, okay, 100 years ago, next year, it'll be 100 years ago, Sacred Grove. And by the way, how did I do this? What I did is I searched for total and annular solar eclipses for all these locations. You can do that by going to timeanddate.com. It takes a while, believe me, but it's worth it. And you can go through here and you can go, there's this drop down right here. You can go decade by decade all the way up until 2199. So starting with the year 1900 and then going to 2199. And so that's what I did. It was long and tedious, but this is what I found out. So let's pay attention to column K for Sacred Grove. So you have this one in 1925. And then you don't have another one in any of these locations for a long time. A long, long time. The next set comes up in 1994, which is really interesting because that's the year that Ezra Taft Benson passed away on May 30th, 1994. And by the way, just as a side note, the day after he died, there was this very unusual derecho called the Utah-Wyoming derecho of May 31st, 1994. A derecho, in simplistic terms, it's like basically like an inland hurricane. It's like hurricane force winds that go for a long ways. I can't remember if it's like 200 miles or something like that. But this happened the day after he died. Here's an animation of it, or like satellite imagery of it. This is NOAA's website, by the way, but this is like a dated one. Anyway, so 1994, in the same month that he passed away, just 20 days before, he had an annular solar eclipse that went over the Sacred Grove, as well as Kirtland and Hiram and Fayette and Independence, Missouri. All right, fast forward, and that brings us to April 8th of 2024. This is the one that I was able to see for myself. I was at the Kirtland Temple. You can look up that video on my channel. It was amazing. The path of totality went over Kirtland, Hiram, the Sacred Grove, and Fayette, New York. And there was actually a special worldwide youth devotional where they went to the Sacred Grove and they filmed the devotional from there during the eclipse. Okay, so what about after this? What about after 2024? Well, there aren't any more for the Sacred Grove. From then going until the last date that I'm able to search, 2199, there are no more for the Sacred Grove. So I find that interesting. We're talking about Jimmy Carter. We're talking about President Nelson. Just a couple months after they were born, eclipse, total the path of totality goes over the Sacred Grove. And then the year that Jimmy Carter dies, it also goes over the Sacred Grove. I mean, there you go. I don't know. I don't care too much about predicting the future or putting together timelines or trying to figure out what I just like to observe. I like to read the doctrine, both in the scriptures and modern day prophets, to get a sense, and then just observe what actually happens. I feel like too many people are obsessed with trying to figure out the timeline, and I think that's a really big mistake because that's what the Jews did. They had all these preconceptions of what Christ was supposed to be, what he was supposed to be according to their own knowledge and quote unquote wisdom. I think that's a bad thing to do. And I think that you can look beyond the mark. That's what it is. It's looking beyond the mark. Just watch what actually happens. And this is what is happening. So this set may be complete. if this is a thing, it may be complete now. 2025 may be a really significant year. By the way, April 6th for 2025 is going to happen on the Sunday of General Conference. And that doesn't happen very often. It happens, but not very often. So now, I guess we need to kind of keep our eyes on Benjamin Netanyahu, because he could potentially be the last one. We'll just have to see. Okay, that's going to be it for this one. So if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also, make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.